Hi everyone, hope everyone's well. This is my review of Salerno 43 from GMT Games. It's from Mark Simonich. It is part of his World War II Hex Encounters series that I have covered a lot on my channel. This is the latest in that series that I've played. I've had this one a little while since it came out and I've played it multiple times, so I thought now's a good time to get it onto the table, play it again and do a quick review. So let's start with the rulebook. Full colour, sequence of play. Apart from the first turn, which I'll talk more about later, German player will go first, go through the different phases, and then the Allied player. Movement very straightforward. There are various types of movement, so more movement with road, extended, etc. Zones of control. This is a ZOC bond game, like a lot of the other games in this series. If you're not familiar with that, it's where counters can have a hex between them and they form a bond effectively. There's a bit more to it than that, but combat, there are multiple steps to the combat. The combat is, I wouldn't say complicated, but it is a multiple step system. You have to go through each step, especially to learn it. And the game, the rulebook does a great job of explaining all that to you. There are quite a few combat modifiers, and that's going to be modifying the column that you'll be rolling on. So the column shifts to the left, for example, in the rain, and to the right if you've got air support, for example. There are multiple types of support: artillery, air and naval. For example, only the Allies have naval. The column also shifts depending on tanks and the quality of tanks, etc. Combat results, quite a few different types of results, and again, you can cross-reference to the rulebook. I would say overall, when you're playing this game, especially the first few turns, you will be referring to the rulebook quite a lot. Determined defense. This can happen as a result of combat. Same with retreating, disruption and recovery. It's all explained in quite detail. You can advance after combat and perform breakthrough combat after advancing. Normal sort of war game supply and isolation. There are artillery units. There are beachheads. We'll have a look at those on the map. There are not too many special unit rules. Then we're into the victory points, which we'll have a look at the map. As I said earlier, there are specific sequence of play for turn 1, which is when the Allies will be performing their beach landings. It's quite cool. And again, it's quite detailed in terms of the rulebook. 2 scenarios. Avalanche, which is basically a 8-turn scenario, and the full campaign game. The full campaign game, I think, is 18 turns from memory. They have exactly the same setup. Highly recommend, if you're short on time, obviously the smaller setup is the way to go. Play the Avalanche. Both are really a fulfilling experience, I would say. Don't think the shorter a scenario is, just a couple of turns. It's not. It's a full scenario. Then we're into the designer notes, which are great to read, the thought process. Then into an extended example of play. This is my recommendation. When you get this game, go through the extended example of play with the counters in front of you, exactly like the example of play. I found that a really good way to learn the mechanics. It is very detailed. It goes through the full turn. And helps you understand a lot of the mechanics you've been reading about. And then at the end, full index. As I've said, first few times I've played a lot, if not all of the games in this series, I would still refer to the rulebook quite extensively during my first few turns of play. But it is extremely well written. It is detailed. It is 20 odd. I think it's 20, something like that. 20. Let's have a look. Especially 25 pages of rules. There are multiple components to all the mechanics. It is a fairly detailed war game. It's definitely medium in terms of its complexity. Next, we'll have a look at the player aid. This is a folded player aid. I've just laid it out here just for the camera. You've got your combat results table, which you'll be using extensively, and thankfully a description of all the results, so you don't have to keep referring back to the rulebook once you get into the flow of performing the combat. You've got all the different terrain types and their effect on combat. their effect on the number of movement points, etc. Description of the core counters that you're going to be using. Description of the charts, or tables I should say, that can happen as a result of the combat, such as determined defense. Got a list of all your combat modifiers. So for example, if you're on a 1-to-1, it is an odds ratio based game mechanic. If you're on 1-to-1, you'll be shifting columns to the right or to the left, and that will determine the final column. Those shifts are based on the counters that you're fighting with, the environment you're fighting in, and what support that you have. If I flip it over, full sequence of play here. Specific mention of the mountain hex side, which is important because there are a lot of mountain hexes on this game, as befits this campaign. We've got the specific tables to specific components, such as the invasion and the airborne drop. Details of all the different types of NATO symbols and what they mean if you're not familiar with those. And any special rules associated with them, which is extremely useful. Overall, as you can see, nicely laid out, very well detailed, very good example of a detailed player aid that you will be referring to consistently throughout the whole game. So here we've got the game laid out. I've put the counters down almost as if this was sort of turn 3 into the game. Just to illustrate a few of the points. The map itself is not too large. It's one of the smaller footprint maps, and it's a single map only game. So if you're short of space, it's ideal. The map, and you on the right here, over here, are the reinforcement cards with all the counters on for reinforcements. That whole footprint is about the same size as a normal single map type hex encounter war game at this sort of level of detail. The things that I liked about the map, the contents of the hexes are very clear. The artistry of the map is very functional, I would describe it, very pleasing to the eye. It's not a terribly artistic map, it's very functional, but looks good on the table. There is a lot, as you can see, there's a huge amount of player aid components on the left side of the map. I know some people don't always like those sort of things on a map, but they are important to the gameplay. So you've got VP, a record track, supply point record track. You've got your eliminated box. You've got your floating reserve. You've got your turn track and details associated with it. You've even got, you just about see there, a sequence of play on the map. All the entry points for the different things, and there are some game mechanic information on the map, so victory points, etc., which are very useful. So the map is orientated around the gameplay, play experience, and the usability of the game. That's its foremost function, I would describe. It's not a terribly thematically evocative map, but it doesn't need to be. The counters themselves, again, very clear, very nicely laid out. I play games with reading glasses, so my sight as I've got older isn't as good as it used to be, but it's very clear to me the contents of all the counters. The great thing with the setup card, it tells you on the counters which hexes to put the counters in. That information is on the counters. It's also very clear the different nationalities, we'll call them, involved. So we've got the Americans, the British and Allies, Commonwealth, etc. And then we've got the Axis forces. It's all very clear. It's a very, very playable game from its components point of view. The map is paper. You can buy a mounted map. I don't have one. You can get one if you want. The map one's the paper one's totally fine. I've got this under plexi, so if there's a little bit of camera glare, I do apologise for that. Quality of the counters themselves, very good. Normal GMT fare, very playable. It's not huge, as you can see from this example here. There's not a huge number of counters on this game compared to a lot of war games at this level of complexity, but that's because the action takes place on a smaller map. There are quite a few more reinforcements on the reinforcement card, so this is not all the counters that you'll be using. In terms of the mechanics, as I said, movement, very straightforward. The same with combat. The thing with this game, and this is my advice to anyone, number one, if you've played other games from the same designer in the series, so if you've played Normandy, if you've played Holland, if you've played Stalingrad, most of these mechanics are similar or the same as the other games, and you'll take to those straight away. If you haven't, this is a good starting point, because this, number one, it's a smaller footprint. Number two, the scenario length, if you're playing that shorter turn, is 8 turns, and that smaller scenario is still a very fulfilling scenario without the campaign. Now I said it's 18 turns. I actually think it's more than 18 turns, but you can't see, my microphone just here is blocking the turn track. So I think it's actually 20 some turns, something like that. But the main campaign does take quite a while. The short campaign, 8 turns, you're not... I mean, if you spent all night playing it, you could probably do it in an evening, but I think the truth of it is at a leisurely pace, it's 2 or 3 evenings, if I'm being honest. Is it as much as that? Maybe a little bit less, to be fair. It's 8 turns. You'll probably the first turn, the actual Allied beach landing. So the Allies are coming on these here into these beach zones here. The commandos are attacking Salerno. The United States Rangers up here. The first turn doesn't take very long because the rulebook talks you through exactly what you need to roll. It's very straightforward. There are quite a few moving parts to it and exemptions. And then the second turn, which, if you will, is the first turn for the normal game, that will take you a little bit longer to get through because you'll just go through all the mechanics. Do you know what I mean? Every turn after that is pretty straightforward. Combat is very, combat, as we said, you'll be looking at each counter has this sort of attacking value, the defense value, and the movement. So you're just comparing the attacking values compared to the defense, and then you're shifting on that column on the player rate. And then after combat, the results of that combat, that's where there's multiple parts to that as well. There's multiple different outcomes from combat and rules associated with. So combat, actually, the one thing I do like about this game series, you get 1d6, you're only ever rolling 1 dice at a time. It's not a heavy dice rolling game, this. You'll find most of your time you're not actually rolling that many dice very often. In fact, from thinking about it at a very high level, you only ever really roll 1 dice for every combat. How the game plays. So what I have found when I have been playing it, now I'll caveat this and say I have played it solo. There's no solitaire bot. I've played both sides to the best. I've found the Allies will be pushing in, taking their objectives. So Salerno, for example, there's an airfield here. That'll stop the Germans getting air support. These objectives here. And then what will happen is the Germans will start piling in their reinforcements, responding to the Allies' invasion. And that's when the Germans start to show their teeth a lot more. And there'll be backwards and forwards, especially on this side at the top end of the map, backwards and forwards between the Germans and the Allies. And it can lead some quite interesting narrative points within the battle, and I've very much enjoyed that. So a very involving, is that the right word? Involving and deep war game with a lot of moving and parts. The sum of all those make the game feel in some ways more complicated than it really is, because individually none of the mechanics are that complicated, but there's quite a few of them. So some concluding thoughts. Who's the game for and what do I like about it? I like the fact that it's a good introduction to the system. So if you've not played any of the games in this series, this one's a good one to get because it's a slightly smaller footprint. It's 1 map only. It's inexpensive. Like I paid, I'm going to say something between 30 something pounds and 40 something pounds. I can't recall the exact amount when I bought it. It's not expensive. It's not a terrible thin box. It's not an expensive war game. It is got all the major things about this series that I like. I like the Zockbond system. I like the depth of all the mechanics. It's a mid-level in terms of complexity, medium level hex and counter war game, and I love playing those types of games. Who do I think it's for? I think it's for people who want something that's really got quite some meat on the bones in terms of the complexities and the chrome, in terms of historical authenticity, but for someone who wants to play on a single map. So if you want those types of war games, but you don't have space all the time to play a 2-map or 4-map type monster game, but you want something that's really got a lot of detail in it, and it's got a great order of battle. It feels historically authentic. I think this is a brilliant, and I think for the price, I think you'd be mad not to get it for that price, to be honest with you. I can't think of another war game that's as detailed as this for a single map game for this kind of price. Just can't think of one. If there are any others, please put them in the comments, because I'll be getting them. I've had a lot of fun playing it. I've played both the smaller scenario and the full campaign. I think one of the advantages is the smaller scenario, does not take a huge amount of time to play, and it will get you. I'm going to go on a thing here and say it gets you 70% of the game experience. The full campaign is the full campaign. It's always going to be the bigger version, if you will. But the smaller scenario does a lot that the full campaign does, and you can play that in a couple of evenings quite comfortably. I mean, full evenings where you're taking your time, going through all the steps. It is not a game, I think, in my opinion, where you can skim through the rules and go, oh, I've got this down, put the rule book away, and then just play and roll dice. It's not that. It is not that. I've never been able to play it like that. I play it with the rule book open pretty much consistently. I like to try and get all the rules as right as I possibly can, to understand all the mechanics and the subtleties of those mechanics, and this game has that in spades. It's got huge amounts of depth. So overall, big thumbs up from me. Another great game in this series. I've enjoyed all the games in this series. I've reviewed a lot of them on my channel. Please check them out, any of the reviews that I've done. If you've played this, would love to hear any thoughts from yourself. So please put any comments in the comments section. And thanks for watching, as always. Thank you.